Hello and welcome to today's Delta Credit Tip. So you had a little hospital visit a while back and now you're getting the bill and it's about to put you back in the hospital. Where did all this money come from? How did it get on my credit report? Do I really owe this money? Can I be sued? How do I handle it? Well, stay tuned. We're going to fill you in on today's Delta Credit Tip. Hello and welcome back to today's Delta Credit Tip. So today we're talking medical debt. Debt in the United States has become an epidemic in and of itself, whether it's student loan debt, credit card debt, or in this case, medical debt. And a lot of times medical debt takes us kind of off guard, right? We can handle credit cards sometimes, we can handle that cell phone bill, but those unexpected medical issues have a tendency to creep up on us financially. So today we're going to talk about what you want to do both prior, during, and after your stay with the hospital to make sure that you can protect your credit or fix your credit on the back end. Now, there's a lot of information we're going to cover today. My Floridians, you're going to want to stick to the very end because we've got some special circumstantial issues that you're going to want to, hear about. So stay tuned to the end for my Floridians. For the rest of you, hopefully this information is helpful as well. Don't forget, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so that every Thursday as we come out with more information to help you in your credit restoration process, you get this information as we get it, right? And if you happen to know someone who's going through a lot of medical issues and the bills are starting to mount up, share this information with them because that's the whole purpose of the channel, right? So that we can help ourselves and help others make a choice to make a change here with Delta. So let's talk about medical debt, okay? The thing is that medical debt is not something that we can always control. And when things start to pop up on your credit report, it has a big effect on a lot of things when it comes to your credit, obviously. Now, there have been some recent suggestions in laws. As a matter of fact, back in May of 2019, new legislation was entered into the Senate so that there was an entire year waiting period before medical issues can be reported on your credit report. Hasn't quite passed legislation yet, but there is a new law that states that they have to wait at least 180 days to give you a little bit of a reprieve to figure out, well, what do you owe, what don't you owe, and get the insurance information correct and applied appropriately. So keep that in mind if you happen to have something that hits your credit report right after you left the hospital or within 30, 60, or even 90 days of you coming out of the hospital, because that's just an opportunity for you to get that information deleted and actually work out the account, right? But that's the easy stuff. We'll get back to that in just a minute. First, let's talk about what do you want to do before you go to the hospital. And we're going to start off with a planned event, right? Planned events are a little bit easier to navigate through because it's a planned event. It's not like you got into a car accident and got an ambulance ride to the hospital. But if you're going into a situation where you've got maybe a chronic illness like a cancer or some sort of issue that you want to get resolved, there's some preliminary work that you can do to protect yourself for those and some of the unplanned events. We're going to go through those first. So the first thing you're going to want to do is know your plan. If you happen to be purchasing a plan, if you happen to have medical insurance, know your plan, right? Know what's covered, know what's not covered, know what the deductible is, know what the co-pays are, know how long you have before they won't pay anymore, right? Like some of the government plans won't pay after so much time. So you want to make sure you understand your plan completely. Every plan has a plan administrator that is designed or hired to help you navigate through that process and understand it. So make sure you take advantage of that, okay? Also, if you get your insurance through your employer, there's other things that you might be able to get that can help you through that process. One of those is what they call a health savings account. Now, really what that is that's where a portion of your income gets set aside through your paycheck to a savings account that's specifically designed to help you with medical issues should they arise. Now, if you have a lot of regular medical issues, right, like you've got prescriptions that you take, or glasses, or chronic bone issues where you might have teeth problems. If you know you're going to have regular recurring medical issues throughout the year, diabetes, whatever, you can use this account to make sure that the money is set aside ahead of time for you to pay it. Just be careful that you understand the health savings plan, because a lot of times if you don't use that money, you lose that money at the end of the year. So make sure you understand that plan thoroughly, but it is a good opportunity for you to kind of set some money aside before you get into your checking account to be set aside for those medical issues. All right, just a kind of a preparatory, a precautionary measure, right? The next thing you might want to look at is what they call a medical credit card. Now, the thing about medical debt, though, you got to keep in mind that there's typically no interest that you're going to get charged on medical debt. So if you put that debt on a credit card, then you're going to find that you're going to start paying interest on that money. Right? So now it's costing you more money. So just be cognizant of that, but sometimes you don't really have a choice. And a lot of times what the medical credit card can do is, if there happens to be a balance left over, then of course the hospital go ahead and puts that on the card, which prevents, of course, credit reporting and other things like that. And not to mention, gives you some time to pay it back, right? If this is going to be a planned event, go to the doctor and find out how much it costs, right? You can start to budget for this procedure, and sometimes you can even negotiate pricing prior to getting the service, right? You never know unless you ask, and there are some doctors that might be willing to negotiate. There are certain things that they cannot do, right? Like they can't waive your copay. There's certain laws that are in place that limits how they are able to behave, but you've got to ask them anyway, okay? Also, if you're going in for a procedure, say you're having a baby or a surgery, you got to make sure that everybody in that hospital room that's doing some sort of procedure with you are all in your network. All right, we're going to talk about this whole in-network, out-of-network concept, right? But you may go, say, have a baby, and your doctor that's delivering the baby is in your network, but the anesthesiologist or the person giving you the epidural or the nutritionist or whomever, they may be out of network, and you don't realize that till you get your bill. All right, so just make sure that the hospital is aware of who your insurance provider is, and make sure that everybody in the room is, enrolled in that plan as a medical service provider. Okay. But that's the easy stuff, right? The planned event where you're going to the hospital, dental work, surgeries, that kind of thing. You know what you're getting into. It's the unplanned events that typically create this dilemma. Okay, so let's talk about the unplanned event, right? And really what makes this an issue is sometimes you may find yourself in a hospital that's out of network, right? It's usually at the worst time, right? And you usually don't find out till after the fact that the doctor that performed whatever they had to on you didn't happen to be in your network, okay? Now, if you are self-pay, recognize that self-pay people typically are charged a different rate. So if it's a planned event, you want to find out what the self-pay cost is going into it. And if it's an unplanned event going to the doctor, you're still going to want to, after the fact, find out, hey, was I billed the insurance rate, or was I billed the uninsured rate? But let's go through the whole idea of after the fact, right? You get this bill from the doctor. It's this huge amount of money. Now, sometimes the type of hospital that you went to matters. So if you went to a nonprofit hospital, which most hospitals are, okay, they get these huge tax breaks for being nonprofit and servicing some of the low income people that come in, okay? And there's been certain state hospitals in certain states that have gotten into a lot of trouble for suing low to moderate income patients without providing options for them because they do receive these tax benefits. And recently, laws have been put into place whereby their charity, their charity policy has to be disclosed on their website. So if you've been to a hospital, or if you're going to a hospital and you don't have a whole lot of income, and you know the procedure is going to be an expensive one, you can look to see what their charity programs are like and start having that dialogue with them about how you can either reduce the cost or eliminate the cost of your procedure based on their charity that they offer. Now, just because they are a nonprofit hospital doesn't mean that they can't sue you for the difference. It doesn't mean that they can't come after you for balances that you owe them. It's just that they have to, before they sue you, disclose what those policies are and see if they can somehow fit you in one of those policies. And it's a great thing, right? Because like I said, not everybody can afford all these medical bills and that they're unplanned events. So you want to make sure that you've had that discussion with them. Now, as you're leaving the hospital, that is your opportunity to make sure you go down to the billing office and say, hey, look, I'm underinsured, I'm uninsured, or I am insured. Let's go over everything that happened while I was here. And you want to see a day-to-day account of all the bills that are due. And that's your opportunity to now make sure that everything is going to the insurance for payment, or you can, depending on how long you've been in the hospital, maybe they've already submitted it, but usually they're not going to have everything paid when you leave. You just need to know how is it being structured, where is it going, and sometimes you want to know what are the codes that they're going to use to send it to the insurance company, and you can check with the insurance to make sure that the codes are right? That's also an opportunity for you to negotiate a payment plan, right? You don't want these accounts going to collections. So if you come up with a written, agreed payment plan before you leave, that will prevent any future credit hardship that you may encounter. And hospitals are usually pretty flexible when it comes to payment plans. Again, unexpected events lead to unexpected bills, and they are expensive because insurance has taken over the country and makes everything way more costly than what it needs to be. So before you leave that hospital, make sure that you've negotiated that out. So let's say it's not a planned event, right? And you didn't negotiate it before you left. You didn't quite understand your plan before you left. Now you've got all these medical debts on your credit report. What do I do now? Well, first, before we go into how you want to handle it, if you're doing this because you're trying to become lendable, recognize that medical debt typically is not a consideration with mortgage lending, except to the degree that it affects your score. Remember, having good credit is different than being lendable. So you want to make sure that you're talking with your lender about what's excusable and what's not on that credit report before you start shelling out cash. But let's talk about those credit items, those debt collection items, those medical debt collection items on your credit report. How do you handle them? Well, the first thing you want to do is check the time of when they were reported to the credit report, when it went to the debt collector. Because again, if it's prior to 180 days from when you left that hospital, then they need to bring that thing off of there and give you an opportunity to negotiate something out. And in that negotiation, your payment plan needs to dictate in there that reporting to the credit bureaus will not be done except when you default on the plan. So get that dialogue in writing if you happen to notice that it reported a little too soon. But for any debt that's on there, we're not going to just recommend you pay them. And you really can't just call the hospital, because usually at that point, the hospital has either assigned or has sold the debt to a debt collector. But that would be the second thing that I would do, is call the hospital directly and see if they will recall it from the debt collector and give you the opportunity to negotiate it out. Just let them know, hey, really wasn't feeling too well when I left, right? And it slipped. And If you are trying to negotiate this as you're leaving the hospital, one thing that you might want to also keep in mind is you want to keep a recovery time in the front of that, so that you have time to kind of get back on your feet before you have to make a payment. Okay, but again, as we're looking on the credit report, we don't want to just pay them right away. You want to first approach the hospital. The next step to that is validating that debt, that proof of obligation that we talk about a lot of times in our dispute letter videos. So you want to make sure that you're being billed the proper amount. And that can be a little bit complicated because you don't really know what you owe and how do you make sure that they're correct. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to get is an itemization of what you're being charged for. If this is with a third-party debt collector, I don't recommend you dispute this with the bureaus because you're not going to get an itemized list. You need to get this from the company that's collecting the debt. Now, food for thought. If the debt collector sends you a composite list of all the procedures that you've gotten done while you were at the hospital and why you were billed, recognize that there's a HIPAA violation there, and you may want to call us on that before you negotiate that any further, okay? But if they haven't had you sign a HIPAA release form, or once they have had you sign a HIPAA release form, then you should expect an itemized list of both all the procedures and the total costs. You also want to find out, well, how was my insurance applied? How was it coded to the insurance? If you're that savvy and know about coding, that could determine how much was actually paid and why or why not, and it makes a difference on how much you owe, obviously, right? Also, you want to check the amount that's charged off from the hospital versus the amount that's being collected by the debt collector, because those two amounts should be equal, unless in the contract with the hospital there was some verbiage in there that says that a debt collector is allowed to charge interest or fees in their method of collecting, right? And in that, you also want to get the contract between the hospital and the debt collector to make sure that they are the right ones that should be collecting on the debt, right? So you validate the debt. You also want to make sure that in that validation, the statute of limitations has not been reached. So you're going to want to figure that out for your state. In the state of Florida, where we're from, that's 5 years. So legally, you still owe a hospital bill for 5 years, but after that, you don't legally owe it, and that could change how you want to negotiate that debt. Okay. So again, you want to validate the debt. Try and get it removed. If it turns out that the debt is a valid debt and you do owe the money and you do pay them off, try to negotiate the deletion with your payment, because if you don't negotiate the deletion, all they're going to do is update the account, and of course that's not an optimal situation to have, paid but charged off debts on your credit report. It's just not the maximum result that you're looking for. Okay, so for those of you that are in Florida, you want to watch out for what they call balanced billing. Okay, and this is where about 22% of all people that go to an ER, especially in the state of Florida, run into a problem. And that's where you go into the hospital, like the situation with the pregnant woman I talked about earlier. You go into the hospital, and the primary person that you go to is in network, but everybody else isn't, and now you get this humongous bill because they are all out of network. Well, in the state of Florida, that's called balanced billing, and that's not legal. If you go to a hospital that is an in-network hospital, but get seen by someone who is out of network while you're in that hospital, well, that's on the hospital, right? They're going to have to figure that out. How are they going to cover that between them and the insurance? And that's not a liability for you, okay? And again, remember, statutes of limitations in the state of Florida, 5 years. After 5 years, you do not legally owe that money anymore, and your payment would be considered voluntary. Whether you actually pay them, that's your decision to make. I'm not influencing you one way or the other. I'm just saying you don't legally owe it. All right? So, We've talked about a lot of stuff. If you've got comments, concerns, or issues that you've had, put the comments below. Ask your questions. We'll get back with you as soon as we can. We know it's a lot of information. Hopefully it's been helpful. If so, give us those thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so that every Thursday when we come out with this information, you get it right out of the gate. Thank you for watching. And in the meantime, make a choice, make a change. Delta.